Imagine a world where the word love does not exist. I don't mean a world where love is rare or where love is difficult to find. I mean a world where the concept simply has no name, where the vocabulary of affection has been surgically removed from the human experience. Imagine a world where you do not know the name of the country you live in, where you do not know that the earth is round, where you do not know what society means or what money is, or what it feels like to have a full stomach. Imagine a world where your only purpose, your singular, terrified reason for breathing, is to work until you die. For 23 years, this was the only reality Shin Dong-hyuk knew. He was not a soldier captured in war. He was not a political dissident who spoke out against the regime. He was not a criminal who stole. He was a prisoner from the moment he drew his first breath. Shin was born inside the fence. Camp 14. Camp 14 is a total control zone in North Korea. It is a place that does not exist on any civilian map. If you look at satellite imagery, it appears only as a gray scar on the landscape north of Pyongyang. It is a place designed for one thing: the complete erasure of human beings through labor and starvation. No one escapes Camp 14. The electric fence that surrounds it is 10 feet high, pulsing with lethal voltage. The guards in the watchtowers are ordered to shoot on sight. The terrain outside is frozen, mountainous, and hostile. To be born in Camp 14 is to die in Camp 14. That is the rule. That is the law. That is the fate of thousands of people right now, as you listen to this. But on a freezing afternoon in January 2005, Shin Dong-hyuk did the impossible. He didn't escape for freedom. He didn't escape for democracy. He didn't escape because he wanted liberty or rights. He didn't even know what those words meant. He escaped because he was hungry. This is not just a story of physical survival. This is a story of a man who had to lose his humanity to save his life. It is the story of a boy who sold his own mother for a bowl of rice. And it is the story of the terrible price he paid to walk out of hell. This is the story of Prisoner 14. To understand the escape, you must first understand the cage. You must understand the specific, suffocating texture of life inside the wire. Shin was born in 1982, but he had no birthday parties. He had no toys. He had no concept of play. His birth was an administrative error in the eyes of the guards, permitted only as a reward for his parents' hard labor. In North Korea, the regime practices a policy known as the 3 generations of punishment. It was established by the regime's founder, Kim Il-sung, in the 1950s. The decree was simple and brutal. The seed of the enemy must be eliminated for 3 generations. If your grandfather commits a crime against the state, perhaps he broke a machine or told a joke about the leader or practiced Christianity, he is punished. But it doesn't end there. His children are imprisoned. And his grandchildren, you are imprisoned. Shin was that 3rd generation. He was the seed that had to be crushed. He was born into a caste of untouchables. In the camp, he wasn't called a boy. He was called a reactionary. He was filth. Let's look at his home. Camp 14 is huge. It is 30 miles long and 15 miles wide. It contains mines, factories, and farms. It is a closed universe. Shin lived in a shack with no heating, no running water, and no electricity. His father was a prisoner. His mother was a prisoner. They were strangers paired together for a few nights of reward marriage. This was the only way children were born. Shin grew up viewing his mother not as a protector, but as a competitor. This is difficult for us to comprehend. In the free world, the bond between mother and child is sacred. It is the foundation of our psychology. But in Camp 14, starvation distorts everything. Food was scarce. A typical meal was a small bowl of corn gruel and cabbage soup with dirt in it. When Shin was young, he watched his mother eating. He didn't feel love. He felt rage. He felt she was taking food that belonged to him. When she fell asleep, he would search her clothes for grains of corn she might have dropped. He called her mother only because he had no other word for her. But he didn't know what it meant. He didn't know it implied safety. To him, she was just another prisoner who beat him when he stole her lunch. His childhood was a blur of gray rock and black coal. His first memory is not of a lullaby. It is of an execution. He was 4 years old. He was taken to a field near a riverbank. He stood with hundreds of other prisoners. He watched a man tied to a wooden post. He watched the guard stuff pebbles into the man's mouth so he could not scream or curse the great leader. Then he watched them shoot him. Shin didn't cry. He didn't look away. To a 4-year-old in Camp 14, this was as natural as the rain. It was simply what happened to people who broke the rules. He didn't know that in other places, people died in hospitals surrounded by family. He thought everyone died by the gun. There was a school in the camp. Shin attended it until he was roughly 10 years old. But this wasn't a school where you learned history or mathematics or literature. There were no maps on the wall. There were no books about the outside world. The teachers were guards. They wore uniforms. On their hips, they carried pistols. The curriculum was simple: obedience, labor, and betrayal. Shin learned the 10 laws of Camp 14 by heart. Rule number 1: do not try to escape. Penalty: immediate execution. Rule number 2: do not gather in groups of more than 2. Penalty: execution. Rule number 3: you must steal to survive, but if you are caught stealing, you will be shot. The cruelty of the teachers was casual and absolute. One day, a girl in Shin's class, a 6-year-old, was found with 5 grains of corn in her pocket. She had stolen them from the farm. The teacher didn't send her to the principal's office. He made her kneel at the front of the class. He beat her with a wooden pointer. He struck her head again and again until she collapsed. She died later that night. Shin watched this happen. He didn't feel sympathy for the girl. He felt she was stupid for getting caught. He felt she deserved it for stealing state property. This was the success of the camp's conditioning. They had killed the empathy in these children. They had turned them into little monsters who only cared about their own survival. Shin himself was not immune to the violence. When he was working in a sewing factory years later, he accidentally dropped a heavy sewing machine. It broke. The guard dragged him to a table. He took a knife. To teach him a lesson about the value of machinery, the guard cut off the tip of Shin's middle finger. There was no anesthesia, no bandage, just the raw, searing pain and the laughter of the guard. Shin wrapped his hand in a dirty rag and went back to work. If he stopped working, he wouldn't get his soup. That missing finger is a testament today, a permanent physical reminder that in Camp 14, a machine was worth more than a human body. We must now approach the darkest moment of Shin's life, the event that defines his trauma. The year was 1996. Shin was 14 years old. He had been brainwashed to believe that the camp rules were the laws of the universe, and that anyone who broke them was evil. One night, Shin was pretending to sleep in the small, freezing room he shared with his mother. He heard whispering. It was his mother and his older brother who rarely visited. They were talking about something forbidden. They were eating rice, stolen rice, and they were talking about escape. His brother had a plan. His mother was encouraging him. They were desperate. Shin lay there in the dark, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. Put yourself in that room. In a normal world, a 14-year-old boy hearing his family discuss escape would be worried for their safety. He would want to help. He would want to run with them. But Shin didn't have a normal brain. He had a camp brain. He was terrified. He knew the camp law. If one member of a family escapes, the rest of the family is executed. He thought, if they leave, I die. If they run, the guards will shoot me. But there was something else, a darker, more insidious instinct that the school had planted in him. The instinct of the informant. He thought, if I tell the guards, I will be a hero. I will be a good citizen. And maybe, just maybe, they will give me a full bowl of rice with meat in it. The next morning, Shin didn't hug his mother. He didn't warn his brother. He walked to the school guard. He looked the man in the eye, and he said, my mother and brother are planning to escape. He sold them. He expected a reward. He expected praise. But Camp 14 is a place of caprice and malice. The guards didn't pat him on the head. They came for him. Because he was part of the family, they suspected he was hiding something. They didn't believe he wasn't part of the plan. They dragged him away. They took him to an underground interrogation center. For 7 months, Shin was in hell. He was 14, a child. They stripped him. They hung him upside down from the ceiling by his ankles. They lowered him over a charcoal fire. The skin on his back blistered and popped. The smell of his own burning flesh filled the small stone cell. He screamed that he was the one who reported them. He screamed that he was loyal to the state. But they kept burning him. Eventually, the torture stopped. Not because of mercy, but because they finally verified his story. He was released, but not to go home. He was taken to the execution ground. November 1996. The sky was gray. The wind was biting. The entire camp population was gathered. Thousands of silent, gray faces in the field. Shin was forced to sit in the front row. They brought out 2 prisoners. They were bruised, broken, barely able to stand. One was his brother. The other was his mother. Shin watched. He watched the guards tie his brother to the wooden post. He watched the firing squad take aim. 3 shots. His brother slumped forward. Then he watched his mother. They didn't shoot her. They walked her to a gallows. As they put the noose around her neck, she scanned the crowd. She was looking for someone. She found Shin in the front row. She locked eyes with him. What did she see? Did she know he had betrayed her? Or was she just looking for her son one last time? Shin didn't feel guilt. Not then. He was angry at her. He glared at her. He thought, why did you do this? Why did you make me suffer? You broke the rules. You deserve this. He watched the stool get kicked away. He watched his mother struggle. He watched her die. He walked back to his cell, convinced he was the good boy, convinced he had done the right thing. He was alive. They were dead. That was the only math that mattered. It would take 10 years for the guilt to finally catch up with him. 10 years for him to realize that he had murdered the only person who might have loved him. Time moves differently in a prison. It is measured in seasons of hunger. Years passed. Shin grew from a boy into a young man. He was moved to the textile factory. He spent 18 hours a day fixing sewing machines. He was 23 years old. He was empty. He was a machine made of meat and bone. He had no dreams, no aspirations. He had resigned himself to dying in Camp 14, just like his mother. And then, the variable changed. He met Park Yong-chul. He was a new prisoner. Park was different. He wasn't born in the camp. He had lived outside. He had lived in Pyongyang. He had traveled to China. He had been a man of status until he fell out of favor with the regime. Even in his prison rags, Park carried himself with a strange dignity. He had memories of a life that Shin couldn't even hallucinate. Shin was assigned to mentor Park in the factory. And for the first time in his life, Shin had a conversation that wasn't about work or food rations or reporting someone. Park told stories. Park didn't talk about politics. He didn't talk about human rights or democracy. Those concepts were too abstract for Shin. They meant nothing. Park talked about something Shin could understand. He talked about food. He described the outside world through the lens of the stomach. He talked about grilled pork with salt and sesame oil. He talked about roasted chicken with crispy skin. He talked about cold noodles in spicy broth. He talked about a world where you could eat until you were full. A world where you could open a refrigerator and take whatever you wanted. Shin was mesmerized. Is it true? Shin would ask, his voice trembling. Can you really eat meat whenever you want? Yes, Park said. In China, even the dogs eat better than we do here. This statement shattered Shin's world. The idea that a dog in China had a better life than a human in North Korea was a revelation. Shin didn't want the right to vote. He didn't want freedom of speech. He wanted a piece of grilled pork. That desire, that primal, gnawing hunger, was the spark. It was stronger than the fear of the electric fence. It was stronger than the fear of death. Shin began to view Park not as a prisoner, but as a guide. Park knew the geography. He knew how to get to the Chinese border. He knew how to navigate. Shin knew the camp. He knew the guard rotations. He knew where the firewood was collected near the fence. They made a pact. Park would lead Shin to China. Shin would help Park get over the fence. They decided to run. The date was set, January 2nd, 2005. They chose winter for a reason. In winter, the days are short. The sun sets early, and the cold keeps the guards huddled inside their towers, gathered around their stoves. On that day, Shin and Park were assigned to a work detail on a mountain ridge near the perimeter fence. Their job was to trim firewood. They worked all day, their breath misting in the freezing air. The temperature was 10 degrees below zero. Shin's heart was pounding. Every time a guard looked his way, he thought he would be shot. They waited for twilight. The sun dipped behind the jagged peaks. The shadows lengthened. The guards in the nearest tower were hundreds of yards away. It was time. They dropped their tools and moved toward the fence. The fence was a monster. It stood 10 feet high. It was a dense weave of barbed wire. High-voltage insulators hummed with a lethal electric current. There was no gap. No ole. No tunnel. They had to go through it. They reached the wire. They stood in the snow, looking at the barrier that had defined Shin's entire existence. Park turned to Shin. "I'll go first," he whispered. Park crouched down. His plan was to place his jacket over the bottom wire, push it down, and slide through the gap between the wire and the frozen earth. Park took a breath. He lunged, but the ground was uneven. He slipped. Instead of sliding under, he fell directly onto the wires. The sound was deafening. A loud, dry crack, like a whip snapping. The voltage seized Park instantly. He didn't scream. He couldn't. The electricity locked every muscle in his body. He slammed into the wires and froze there, rigid. Sparks flew. Blue and white light illuminated the snow. Within seconds, the smell hit Shin. The smell of burning hair. The smell of cooking flesh. Park was dead before his heart beat another time. Shin stood there, 5 feet away. Total terror. The alarm would sound any second. The guards in the tower would see the sparks. They would see the smoke. Shin had a split-second choice. Run back to the camp? If he went back, he would be tortured and executed. Or go forward. But the fence was blocked by Park's body. Shin looked at his friend's corpse, and he saw a bridge. The physics of the situation were grim but clear. Park's body was shorting out the bottom wire. The current was flowing through him into the ground. The wires above him might be temporarily deadened or grounded. Shin didn't think about the morality. He didn't think about respect for the dead. He thought about survival. He got down on his hands and knees. He crawled toward the burning body. He climbed over Park. He placed his hands on Park's back. He felt the heat. He felt the vibration of the current humming through the dead man's clothes. He scrambled, slipping on the snow and the fabric. He tried to stay low, but as he slid through the gap, his legs brushed the wires above. The current was weaker, but it was still there. It burned through his trousers instantly. It melted the skin on his shins. The pain was absolute. It was a white-hot knife slicing into his legs. Shin bit his tongue to keep from screaming. He kicked. He pushed. He clawed at the frozen earth on the other side. And then, he was through. He fell face-first into the snow on the free side of the fence. He lay there for a second, gasping, waiting for the bullet. But no bullet came. He stood up. He looked back at the fence. He saw Park, tangled in the wire, smoke rising from his back into the winter night. Shin didn't say a prayer. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't cry for his friend. He turned his back on the camp. He ran. He ran on burned, bleeding legs. He ran into the darkness. He ran toward a world he had never seen. He was out, but he was not safe. Shin was now a fugitive in a police state. He was 23 years old, but he had the social intelligence of a child. He was wearing prison rags. He was bleeding. He had no money. He had no map. He didn't even know where China was. All he knew was north. Park had said, "Go north." So he followed the North Star. The journey that followed was a miracle of endurance and thievery. Shin broke into an empty farmhouse. He found an old military uniform. This was his camouflage. In North Korea, the military is everywhere. A soldier walking alone is not suspicious. A prisoner in rags is. He put on the uniform. He found a little bit of rice. He walked for days. His legs were infected. The burns were festering. Every step was agony. But the hunger drove him on. He realized quickly that if he acted like he belonged, people ignored him. He was a ghost drifting through the countryside. He saw things he had never seen before. He saw people walking freely. He saw money being exchanged. He saw a television through a window. He was like an alien visiting Earth. But he couldn't stop to marvel. He had to keep moving. He stole food from porches. He ate snow to stay hydrated. Finally, after weeks of walking, he reached the Tumun River. The border. On the other side was China. The river was frozen, but it was wide and dangerous. Border guards patrolled both banks. Shin waited for a gap in the patrols. He stepped onto the ice. He walked. The wind howled across the frozen expanse. Halfway across, the ice groaned, cracked. He fell in. The freezing water engulfed him. It soaked his uniform. It stung his open wounds like acid. He thrashed, fighting the current, fighting the weight of his wet clothes. He dragged himself onto the Chinese bank. He crawled into the bushes, shivering violently, his clothes freezing solid against his skin. But he was there. He had left the camp. He had left the country. He was free. But freedom, he would soon learn, is a complicated thing. Shin's journey didn't end at the river. For 2 years, he drifted through China, working as a laborer, always terrified of being caught and sent back. Eventually, he made his way to South Korea, and then to the United States. The world embraced him. He was a marvel. The boy from the Gulag. The only person born in a total control zone to escape and tell the tale. He wrote a book. He met presidents. He spoke at the United Nations. But stories rarely have perfect endings. Shin escaped the fence, but the fence never really left him. Adjusting to the free world was a struggle Shin could not win easily. He didn't know how to handle money. He didn't know how to handle relationships. He didn't know how to love. The conditioning of the camp, the instinct to distrust, to hoard, to survive at all costs, was hardwired into his brain. And then there was the guilt of his mother's death. For a long time, Shin lied about it. When he first told his story to journalists and human rights activists, he couldn't bear to tell them the truth. He said his mother was caught by mistake. He sanitized the story. Why? Because he wanted to be seen as a victim, not a monster. He was terrified that if he told the truth, that he was the snitch, the free world would reject him. That they would look at him with the same disgust he felt for himself. It took him years to find the courage to admit his sin. To admit that Camp 14 had turned him into a parasite. When he finally confessed the truth, he broke down. He said, "I am not a hero. I am a beast. The camp made me a beast." But in admitting his crime, he revealed the true horror of the North Korean system. The regime doesn't just kill bodies, kills souls. It destroys the most fundamental human bond, the bond between parent and child, and replaces it with fear. Today, Shin lives with the scars, the burns on his back, the missing finger, the shiny, melted skin on his legs. But the deepest scars are the ones we cannot see. He suffers from depression. He suffers from nightmares. Every night, when he closes his eyes, he is back in the snow. He is back at the fence. He smells the burning flesh of his friend Park. He sees the eyes of his mother on the gallows. He is free, yes. He can eat grilled pork whenever he wants. But part of him is still there, behind the wire, wandering the gray hills of Camp 14. Shin Dong-hyuk's story is a warning. It is a testament to the resilience of the human body, but also a testament to the fragility of the human spirit. It forces us to ask uncomfortable questions. We like to believe that we are moral beings. We like to believe that we would never betray our family, that we would die before we snitched on our mother. But we have never been hungry. We have never been born in a cage. We have never had our humanity stripped away layer by layer, starting from the day we were born. There are still camps in North Korea. Right now, as this story ends, there is a child being born behind a high-voltage fence. A child who will never know the word love. A child who will look at his mother and see only a rival for food. Shin got out. He is the error in the system, the one who lived to tell us what lies in the dark. But the darkness is still there. So tonight, when you sit down to dinner, when you look at your family, when you lock your door and feel safe, remember Shin. Remember the man who crawled over a dead body just to taste a piece of meat. And ask yourself, if you were in his place, if you were born in the gulag, what would you have done?